They've got a new prime minister. The last guy said that we started a trade war. What's really the deal with Ontario and electricity and gas and all this stuff? If you want to know anything about Canada, you've got to go to the man. It's Ezra Levant. He's the boss over at Rebel News, rebelnews.com. He's also got a brand new book out, too. Ezra, how are you? Good to see you.
Great to see you, too. We're getting a new prime minister in Canada. Justin Trudeau resigned in disgrace, but his replacement is sort of a Trudeau 2.0. The replacement, his name is Mark Carney. He was a board member of the World Economic Forum, so he's sort of a globalist.
Yeah.
He was the central banker in Canada, then again in the UK, where he's friends. Believe it or not, he was friends with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand woman. So there's a lot of question marks about this guy. He's got 3 passports. He hasn't lived in Canada in years. It's sort of weird that we had him installed as our new leader. The Liberal Party had an internal system. Ordinary Canadians couldn't vote. You had to be a Liberal. And this guy's being appointed straight to prime minister without even being elected anywhere. And they allowed 14-year-olds to participate in this Liberal leadership contest, and even foreign citizens. As long as they had permanent residency in Canada, foreign citizens voted to choose our next prime minister. So it's really undemocratic, and this whole thing happened when Trudeau dissolved Parliament to avoid a no-confidence vote. So we're in a bit of a democratic crisis right now. At the same time, we're having a trade battle with our best friends. So it's the worst of times, but, I see it's a ray of sunshine piercing through.
Well, this guy is in place just in a temporary basis, right? In October, you got the actual election?
It will probably come sooner than that because he has no democratic legitimacy. I think he knows it. So we're probably going to go to the polls. Trouble is, 2 things. First of all, you take Trudeau out of the mix, and that left-wing Liberal Party is going to bounce back in the polls because he was really a deadweight dragging them down. Second thing is, Joe, I got to tell you, some Canadians are getting scared of this trade war and the rough stuff that Donald Trump is saying. So ironically, some of Trump's talk, which was designed to yank Trudeau's chain, is actually making some Canadians say, yikes, we better support this new Mark Carney guy to fight back against Trump. So I hope that Trump's style, like he's got that characteristic style, he's bombastic, he's got the tweets, he's got nicknames for people, and he's great at it. But I just hope that doesn't push the Liberals into an election win. Now, I don't think it's gonna, but it's a bit of a risk.
Well, it's interesting because I saw Pierre Poilievre, who's the conservative who's in the lead there. I heard him say that day, to make sure he got in front of it, our best friend just stabbed us in the back. I mean, he's saying the right things to make sure that it's still Canada first, although he's a more conservative guy. Is that any saving grace at all when he came out and got ahead of that immediately?
Well, I mean, he's trying not to, they're trying to paint him as a mini Trump. They're saying he's a traitor. It's a mess. And I tell you, it's tearing me apart because on the one hand, I really admire Trump. I think he's not just going to save America. I think he's going to save the world.
Right.
And now that makes me a minority in Canada to say that, but I do admire him. And I think he's being put through a lot of unfair lawfare and the media and then the actual assassination attempt, not just the character assassination, but they tried to kill the guy. So I'm a fan of Trump, but I also love my home country. I'm a patriotic nationalist Canadian. And that's how I thought, well, how can we square this circle? And I thought, what's a tariff supposed to do? Joe, you know the theory behind tariffs is if there's a factory making Hondas in Mexico, selling those Hondas into the United States, Trump would say, no, move that factory into the U.S. if you want to sell into the U.S. So it's bringing the jobs home, bringing the factories home. I get it very clear. But the thing is, you know what the number one export from Canada to the U.S. is? It's not cars. It's not agriculture even. It's crude oil.
Right.
It's by far the number one thing we sell to you guys, and it's way better to buy it from us than to buy it from OPEC conflict oil, right?
100%.
I call it Canadian ethical oil. But the thing is, how does a tariff move the oil sands? That's where most of our oil is. It's in the province of Alberta. You have to sort of steam it out of the sand. It's called oil sands.
Right.
You can't just move that. It's not like a Honda factory you can move from Mexico. It's going to be there. And if you put a tariff on it, well, who's paying that? It's just going straight in a pipeline to American refineries. So it's not It's not doing the thing you want. So I thought, okay, how do we square this circle? What's the America first move? If you were thinking like a businessman, like a real estate developer, if you're thinking, okay, we want to get Greenland part of our defensive shield, we want to take back Panama, you're thinking like Trump. Well, here's what I thought. Look, there's 170 billion barrels of oil in the oil sands. And the premier of Alberta, that's the province where the oil sands is, she's friendly to Trump. She came down to the inauguration. She's not engaging in this name calling.
Right.
She says she wants to double the production of oil from the oil sands. And I did the math. I thought, well, if you double the production from the oil sands, that is enough for America to displace all the OPEC oil it's buying, all that conflict oil, to get America off the foreign oil, buy it from Canada. By the way, the companies that produce it in Canada, they're either American companies or Canadian companies with lots of American shareholders. So it's sort of American everywhere you look at it. And if you doubled your purchases of Canadian oil, lock in a 50-year deal to buy all 170 billion barrels, that's a $13 trillion deal.
Right.
What happens? Well, first of all, now you can say to Canada, we're buying your oil. We expect you to take some of this money we're paying you and to beef up your military.
Yes.
And I think Canadians would say, okay. And the big win for America is you don't have to buy oil from the awful places in the world. You know, the U.S. Fifth Fleet spends about $50 billion a year patrolling the Persian Gulf area. Why? Oil tankers. That's the only reason. If you displace that conflict oil with Canadian ethical oil, you could still mess around in the Middle East if you wanted to, but you wouldn't be forced to. You're not trapped there. So get off the foreign conflict oil, double your buy of Canadian ethical oil, lock it in for a 50-year deal. By the way, our USMCA that Donald Trump negotiated, it contains a preferential treatment for American oil buying. So if I'm thinking, well, what's the win-win approach? I mean, fighting with Trudeau is always fun. I get it. I love to do it too. Fighting with this new guy, Mark Carney, he's pretty awful.
Yeah.
But they say don't get mad, don't get even, get ahead. The get ahead move for America is to lock in that oil sands oil, because you know who else is sniffing around the Canadian oil sands? Take a guess, right? Joe. China. Yeah. In fact, they bought an oil sands company about 10 years ago called Nexen. I don't want this wonderful strategic asset. You know, there's more oil in Alberta than anywhere in the world other than Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. There's so much oil. I don't think most Americans know that, because they don't know that they're getting about 4 million barrels a day from Canada. I say double that, and all of a sudden OPEC can't push you around anymore. Anyway, that's the theory. That's why I call it deal of the century, the America First plan for Canada's oil sands. Now, we got to get through this quarrel that's happening right now. But if I was Trump and thinking, what's a legacy move? Abraham Accords peace deal, huge legacy move. End the war in Europe, huge legacy move. But you want to put America on 50 years of reliable, secure, affordable energy that's not going to be subject to any coup or whatever overseas. You buy Canadian. I mean, it's like Trump jokes about the 51st state. Joe, I don't think you want the 51st state from Canada. I don't think you want a California-sized voter bloc that's going to go Democrat in every electoral college.
Well, Ezra, obviously he was trolling Trudeau, and for some reason this has become something more than it was. It was just an in-your-face troll to the guy. By the way, it's Ezra Levant. Go to rebelnews.com. Get his new book. It's called Deal of the Century. DealOfTheCenturyBook.com is where you go and grab it right now. Let me throw a few of the American perspectives back at you. USMCA was negotiated by Trump, and it was a very good deal. For some reason, he thinks he's getting screwed to the tune of $200 billion a year by Canada. Canada has a surplus. We have a deficit. It's hurting our bottom line. But he also has a problem with the border being open to fentanyl coming through, and there is fentanyl coming through from China. So what do you do about that? I mean, if you've got a real leader in Canada, and I don't think Trudeau was that guy, and this Carney guy probably isn't the guy either, you would step up and say, I'm closing the border, stopping the fentanyl, and we want to make sure that we're good partners. And I don't think he's getting that in return. If he did,
he's not.
I think Trump is a deal maker, and he'll say, okay, I'm getting that in return. At least, Justin, you tried. But there doesn't seem to be an attempt.
You are correct. And here's the thing. With Justin Trudeau, since he knew he was leaving soon anyways, there was a moral hazard, if you know what I mean. He did not have the normal rationale for making a deal. He didn't have the normal incentives. And same with this Mark Carney guy who just took over from Trudeau. He thinks he can pull himself up in the polls by being the anti-Trump. He would rather run against Donald Trump, who's not actually on the ballot, than to run against Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader you mentioned earlier. So you have bad faith negotiators on the Canadian side under the Liberal government, and that's the problem. They're antagonizing Trump because they actually don't want a deal. Look, Canada and the U.S. have shared the world's longest undefended border for a long time, and it was undefended because it was safe. It's not safe now, so yes, Canada's got to get serious. We've got to crack down on the drugs and the people smuggling. Trudeau's gone nuts with open borders immigration. He's even letting in people from Gaza. So I think Canada's got to shape up, and we got to do that, Joe, in our own interest, not just because Donald Trump pointed it out. It's like we got a neighbor and we have a fence, and they say good fences make good neighbors. Yes. And our neighbor's pointing out, hey, there's a hole in the fence, it needs a new coat of paint. Maybe we're a little irritated that the neighbor pointed it out, but we should fix it for our own sake too. So fix the drug smuggling, stop the people smuggling, stop the crime, pump up our defense spending so we're not freeloaders. Trump's got a point there. We do have a dairy cartel in this country.
Yeah, what is that? 270% tariff on some dairy products. That's not okay, Ezra. It's just not.
Well, and let me speak as a Canadian who likes cheese, as you can tell just by looking at me. We're paying double for our cheese because you can't get any foreign cheese. And that's just to prop up prices for Quebec dairy farmers. So, again, Canadians, it's in the Canadian interest to have affordable food. We also have poultry quotas too. So we pay about double for our poultry and our dairy than you do. So that, by the way, that's a tax on poor people. When you're making food more expensive, you're not hurting the rich guy, you're hurting the poor guy. So again, these things, Trump is raising them. Canadians are, they're sensitive people and their maybe hurt feelings are hurt, but we got to do those things. Right. Trump's asks are not crazy. He wants American banks to be able to sell mortgages in Canada. Why not? What Canadian wouldn't want more competition? You're not forced to get a loan at Bank of America, but it would be nice if they were on Main Street here so we could have another choice. So again, Trump is not asking us to do anything that's crazy. And maybe the way he asks is sort of not a Canadian way. It's a very Trumpy way.
It's never going to be. It's going to be a Jamaica Queens, New York way. It's just what it's going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why he's one of a kind.
Right.
And I think that the grown-up approach for Canada is to say, let's flip the script around here. Trump mentioned reopening the transporter pipeline, which is called Keystone XL. That's an 800,000 barrel a day pipeline. That would be enough oil to displace all the oil you guys buy from Venezuela. And it would be, it would free Americans to be reliant on the bad guys. I don't know what God was thinking when he handed out oil, but he gave it to all the world's bastards. Seriously.
Right.
Like, you think of who has the oil, it's all the bad guys.
Right.
Except Canada. Yeah. And I would love it if Canada and the U.S. became, we're never going to be as big and as strong as you, but I think it's like Batman and Robin. You guys are Batman, we're Robin, but we're still friends, and right now Batman's giving Robin a bit of a noogie. And
that's true. Yeah. Well, let me say a couple of things here because I think you just broke some news on my show here in the States. I'm going to make sure everybody sees this. First of all, the Keystone XL was canceled by Biden, which helped who? It helped China, his buddies in China who own him. But back to something you said earlier. This new guy and the last guy, Trudeau and Carney, don't want a deal with Trump because if Trump keeps on, tweeting and being the Jamaica Queens guy he is, then that's going to do well for the Liberals in Canada. In other words, they're going to paint Poilievre as Trump. Trump is a bad guy. Vote for me. I love Canada. Is that what I heard you say, basically?
Exactly. In fact, one of the phrases they're trying to get to stick to Pierre Poilievre is maple syrup MAGA. It's so lame. It hasn't caught on, but they're trying so hard to call him a mini Trump because it is in their interest to have a trade war. It's in their interest to quarrel. It's in their interest not to do a deal. And I'm just saying, Donald Trump, I know you hate Trudeau and you will hate Carney. A lot of Canadians do too, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In fact, nothing would enrage Mark Carney more than if Donald Trump said, I want to buy all your oil. USMCA lets me have it. Let's do a $50-year deal. I mean, because, by the way, Mark Carney is a green carbon tax kind of guy.
Oh, is that who he is? Okay.
So I think that doing a deal with this province of Alberta would be a wonderful thing to. I just think it's a win-win-win. Gets America off conflict oil, locks in the resource so China doesn't get it, and the money that comes to Canada, Trump's right, there is a trade surplus. It's because, there's a trade surplus with whoever sells foreign oil to America. But how about in this case, insist that Canada spends some of that money on beefing up our defenses? And I know we're buying some F-35, so that's an American product.
Right.
I think if you do that deal of the century, I call it, if you really do a $13 trillion 50-year deal for oil, I'm pretty sure even a liberal prime minister would say, okay, we're going to invest some of this dough in our military, and we're going to be interoperable with America. We're going to get all American military equipment, obviously.
Right.
So I think it could be a way to cut the Gordian knot here. But you're correct, Joe. Trudeau and the new guy, Carney, do not have a political interest in getting a deal. That's why they're being obstinate on their side. And the thing is, you get obstinate with Trump, he pushes back, and it's sort of and they know that, and they're trying to push his buttons. He's got to realize he's in a negotiation with the other side that doesn't want a deal. He's used to being the guy who can walk away. But he doesn't realize that the other guys here want to walk away. Right. They're faking it when they say they want a deal. They want a battle against Trump.
Well, I'm going to get this interview to him. I think that his people need to see this. He needs to see this. It's Ezra Levant. Go get his book. It's called Deal of the Century. The website is dealofthecenturybook.com. And I want you to read it to find out about our friendship and the trade. And is it a war? Can it be a deal for 50 years? Go and get his book, dealofthecenturybook.com. Before I let you go, I've got maybe 30, maybe 45 seconds. But is it truly some sort of a crime now? To criticize pro-Hamas protesters in Canada? It can't be a crime, can it?
The Toronto police, two Muslim liaison officers for the Toronto police said you're not allowed, or they didn't say they would arrest you, but they said it's inappropriate. They said it's Islamophobic to say people at these pro-Hamas rallies are pro-Hamas. It's the weirdest thing, and it explains why they've allowed these pro-Hamas marches week after week in Canada. What happens in Columbia University has been going on in the streets of Toronto for months. Wow. And I think we sort of saw a glimpse of that when these two Muslim police officers were explaining their rule that just because someone's holding a sign saying Hamas propaganda it was really weird. And yeah, that's a little Toronto flourish there. We don't have someone like Donald Trump to stamp out anti-Semitism like he's doing at Columbia or other places. And I frankly, I'm Jewish myself, and Canada is not as friendly a place these days because we've had mass immigration of people who don't really like our liberal Western values.
Right. It doesn't make any sense. Western civilization is either going to survive or it's not, and it will if we don't have people telling you that you can't say terrorist organizations are bad. It is Ezra Levant. Go and follow him everywhere. Follow Rebel News everywhere. Dealofthecenturybook.com. My man, come back on soon, okay?
Thanks, Joe.
Appreciate you. We're back after this. Stay right here.